I didn't know anything about Invasion until a viewer brought it to my attention a few months back, so I decided to give it a go, and while on the surface it might just look like another generic over-the-shoulder shooter, there's some pretty interesting ideas that it brings to the table, and while it doesn't quite execute it perfectly, Invasion surprised me and felt fresh amongst the sea of similar experiences on the console. Firstly, what helps it stand out is one of the main mechanics you'll be using throughout the game. Early on, you'll be able to equip a device that lets you make the gravity in a particular area either heavier or lighter. You can then use this in combat. Is an enemy hiding behind cover? You can hit them with some low gravity to make them float up. Is an enemy charging at you? Hit them with some high gravity to pin them to the floor. But aside from the obvious combat implications, you'll also need to use gravity to progress through the levels you'll play through by creating your own paths. This will cause you to, for example, travel and fight on the ceiling instead of the floor, or perhaps you'll jump between the floor and the wall to fight enemies. It adds an extra layer of strategy to the gameplay. On the other hand, visually Invasion really excels, and thanks to the gravity mechanic, it results in some rather impressive vistas. But the game does suffer from some technical issues, the most notable being popping and tearing, which is a bit disappointing, but again, it's nothing that completely ruins the game. If you're looking for a solid shooter to get into, Invasion would make a welcome addition to anyone's collection. At the time of its release, it had been a while since players had their hands on a new entry in the Twisted Metal series. After a couple of intermittent releases, including a game on the PSP and a relaunch of Twisted Metal Black, the series made a comeback in an attempt to rekindle the joys of vehicle combat and destruction. As with all of the games, the story revolves around a tournament, where vehicles outfitted with weapons of destruction fight to the death. This tournament, named Twisted Metal, is run by the enigmatic and sinister Calypso, who promises one wish to the victor of his competition. Whereas previous Twisted Metal games feature a host of unique characters and vehicles who all have their individual histories, motivations and desires, this Twisted Metal features only 3 central figures: the psychotic serial killer Sweet Tooth, the biker and daredevil Mr. Grimm, and finally the envious supermodel Dollface. The story is a bit of an afterthought and never really delivers anything compelling, but the frantic and chaotic gameplay this series is known for is its saving grace. There is a wide variety of vehicles, each with their own armor, speed and statistics, as well as other nuances, like how quickly you can recharge the energy bar and special weapons. While vehicles and weapons are important, the battlefields where all this mayhem takes place are of equal significance. There's 8 of them in total, and furthermore, the added destructibility of various walls and buildings adds the possibility to discover new areas. Overall, whilst it's not the best in the series by any means, Twisted Metal is still a great time, and will likely satisfy fans and newcomers alike with its over-the-top combat and destruction. Imagine and the Forsaken Kingdom is a mixture of ideas lifted from various games before it, and like many meals prepared with diverse ingredients, while it tastes good, it can be a bit rough around the edges. Now it's a puzzler at heart and draws much inspiration from the likes of Eco, but unlike that game, combat manages to play a huge role here and is key to advancing through a level, of which there are around 40 spread through 5 diverse areas. You control Tipu and give orders to the big guy Majin. You can command him in several ways: attack, follow, wait, feed, and 5 ways relating to magic that can also be learned. It really does require you to work as a team, as your attacks will fill the magic gauge, and magic can be used to stun several enemies at once to perform a range of combos leading up to a very powerful finishing attack. Also, over-reliance on any one magic is inhibited due to enemies having immunity to certain elements later in the game. Of course, it's not only Majin who can fight. Tipu has access to 3 separate attacks: a normal one, a thrust, and a stealth takedown. Combat overall is very fun and well executed. As you would expect, there's several bosses that block the player's progression. You don't simply hack and slash away at them, as most are a combination of puzzles and combat that bring the basic mechanics to the forefront and really require both of the characters to be in sync. While not exceptional, taking its elements separately, Majin is a charming puzzler with solid gameplay backed up by respectable production value and a classic, well-told story. It's a real pity it never got the attention it deserved back in the day. There's no shortage of quality first-person shooters on the PlayStation 3. With the likes of Resistance and Killzone, there were plenty of options when it came to choosing something to play. One FPS that never really got the chance to shine though was Homefront. It all centered around a cell of Resistance fighters in Colorado that battle for freedom in a North Korean-occupied America. The premise was its main selling point, and with the story being penned by the same guy who wrote Red Dawn and Apocalypse Now, it's for sure one of the better aspects of the game, even if it is a bit unbelievable. Several moments throughout the adventure are bound to stay with you long after you've put the controller down, and in my eyes, that's the sign of something special. Now you get all of the normal missions that come with a modern day FPS, like massive open gun fights, stealth missions, sniper runs, and the odd vehicle point, shoot and destroy mission, and there's a nice amount of variety to the gameplay, which is further pushed by the extensive range of weapons at your disposal. But you're not alone. Joining you are a squad of teammates that manage to up the ante against the invaders, but have all the intelligence of a fucking wall. You'll find them clipping into the floor, or just straight up blocking your path forward at times. But these small issues never really bog down the gameplay and just come off as a minor annoyance. Visually, Homefront isn't going to knock your socks off, but it does succeed in creating believable environments and offers a glimpse of what an invasion of America might look like. Now, it won't last very long as the game is rather short, and with the only other option being an online multiplayer that's well and truly dead. Once you've completed the campaign, there won't be anything else to do. If you can look past this and also find a copy of the game for cheap, it's worth picking up. Knight's Contract introduces players to the stoic character of Heinrich, an executioner who is cursed by one of his victims as she dies, and when the game starts, he's 100 years older, grey, grizzled, cursed with immortality, and wearily walking the earth searching for someone who can break the curse. Heinrich ends up in the last place he ever expected, employed by a resurrected Gretchen, the very witch he beheaded who cursed him. Gretchen is a powerful witch who can entangle enemies in magic, summon meteor showers, and make razor-sharp blades appear from the earth. The player controls only Heinrich's physical movements, yet handles the attacks for both characters. Heinrich's abilities are mapped to the face buttons, where holding down the right trigger transforms the buttons to Gretchen's attacks. Now the battles are fast-paced, and even the smallest of encounters can be a heart-pounding challenge. Heinrich's sword slashes can be chained together easily enough, even though Gretchen's mechanics are mapped closely to Heinrich's. Making her spells reach desired targets requires a bit of skill, and a crab claw-like grip on the controller, as multiple shoulder buttons must be held prior to casting a spell. It can be a bit awkward, but it does get easier as the game progresses. When it comes to presentation, the evocative score and solid voice acting will pull you into the story and keep you wanting to move forward. The problem is that issues with poor AI, a pretty steep default difficulty setting, and confusing level design often prevent you from doing so. It's a shame as Knight's Contract has a lot going for it. Maybe if it had had a bit more time in the oven, it would have been received better when it released. In my eyes, it is still well worth playing. Back in 2004, Sony released Siren for the PlayStation 2, a very creepy survival horror game that took its inspiration from Japanese horror movies. Unfortunately, at least in America, Siren sold poorly and Sony decided we were not worthy enough to receive its sequel. However, after 4 Sirenless years, Sony announced Blood Curse, a remake of the original and the first traditional survival horror game available on the PlayStation 3. Now Blood Curse is separated into 12 episodes, each with 4 to 6 chapters. Each chapter has you completing a variety of objectives that can range from getting to a certain point in the area, protecting or leading a secondary character through dangers, or finding certain items. Original Siren players should be prepared to recognize some of these objectives, such as escaping from a special family get-together. Blood Curse gives you an excellent map system that you can access anytime by pressing select. It lays out the entire area you're in quite nicely and points out landmarks and even tells you exactly where your objectives are. While finding them is easy, it's the way you can accomplish them in almost any way you want to that makes Blood Curse special. Perhaps you can make some noise to lure them away, or find an item to somehow make a smokescreen so you can slip in unnoticed. Finding your own way of completing these objectives gives you a nice sense of accomplishment, and thankfully there's a very generous checkpoint system in place, which definitely keeps frustrations to a minimum. I can highly recommend Blood Curse, and it easily stands tall with the likes of Silent Hill and Fatal Frame. Despite some of its flaws, its creepy, atmospheric, tension-filled, bloody and solid gameplay is well worth any horror fan's time. The Tales series has long been a favourite amongst RPG fans. From its first entry right up to the present day, it's constantly evolved and improved over the years, but like many long-running franchises, there's always a few entries that fly under the radar. Now what made Tales of Graces a bit different was largely the narrative, that managed to mix things up a bit by splitting the story into 3 separate arcs. You had childhood, adulthood and the future, with adulthood being the majority of the game. Getting to see each of the characters grow across the duration of the adventure really added to their believability and helped the warring kingdom that the events take place in come to life. Now all this wouldn't mean anything without some solid gameplay to back it up, and thankfully Graces delivers. There is a lot to do and explore, as well as a generous amount of customization and many extra activities to complete that will keep you busy even after you finish the story. The main game will take about 30 to 40 hours to complete, which is a little shorter than some other JRPGs, but if you're going after the side quests and secrets, you can easily double that number. When it comes to battles, if you've ever played a Tales game before, you'll know exactly what to expect. It's extremely engaging, letting you string together combos like a madman in real time and change your strategies on the fly. But rather than keeping track of magic points or TP, the game employs something called the CC system. Basically, CC is a stat that replenishes quickly in real time and is needed to carry out any of the actions you can perform in battle. Attacking depletes it, with more powerful attacks costing more and some of them needing to be comboed into. Dodging, a main feature of the battle system, also costs CC, but if you dodge just at the right moment, you are actually awarded some. It soon creates a fast and visceral experience. Overall, Tales of Graces F is a solid RPG, and although it's not perfect, the gameplay is fantastic. If you never got round to playing it when it first released, now is the perfect time to give it a go. Since its humble beginnings on the PlayStation 2, the Yakuza series has gone on to become one of the most prevalent franchises today. Of course, along the way, a few games slipped through the cracks, and Dead Souls is clearly one of them. I think it's largely due to its completely different spin on the previous games, which leaves behind the beat-em-up style gameplay of the past, instead opting for an over-the-shoulder view. But Dead Souls almost feels like a throwback to classic survival horror with its control scheme. It honestly feels like a more advanced version of the controls in the original Resident Evil games, and I'll admit at first it was jarring and clumsy, but once you get used to it, you'll be popping zombie heads off with ease in no time. The narrative sees Dead Souls following multiple characters and their own experiences in a Japan overrun by the undead. Each of them are developed wonderfully over the course of the game, and all the side characters that populate their individual stories are written with such care and dedication that you sometimes forget that the game is actually about zombies. Now gameplay is a bit of a mixed bag. The minute-to-minute gameplay is engaging, and some pretty intense boss fights litter the adventure that really test the player's skill. But on the downside, it's one of those games that falls into backtracking hell and repetition, almost refusing to divert from its beaten path of killing a lot of zombies. Good job, it's so much fun to do so, with a wide variety of weapons available as well as a handy auto-aim and a few special skills that help deal with larger groups. It's never felt better mowing down hordes of zombies. But that's not all there is to do. A healthy amount of optional content is included, as well as weapons to purchase, upgrades to collect, and much more that is bound to keep the average player rather busy. If you aren't into story-driven experiences, Dead Souls may not be for you. The game is heavy on the cutscenes, and the control scheme definitely takes a while to get used to. But that being said, I found it to be an incredibly rewarding game, featuring a rich plot filled with wonderful characters and memorable moments, and in the end, it's one of the better zombie games out there. Now there's plenty of unique games on the PlayStation 3 that strayed from the usual norms, but one that never got its chance in the sun has to be The Last Guy. It sees you travelling the world and rescuing innocent people trapped by nightmarish insects and monsters that have laid siege to their cities. This challenging game has an old school vibe, but manages to set itself apart by using real world satellite imagery. And while the concept isn't exactly new, the use of real world locations certainly provides for some interesting levels. Naturally, the game takes place from a bird's eye view and gives the player the ability to zoom in close to the action or pan out for an overview of the entire city. As the last guy, your task is to move around the city, gathering frightened civilians hiding in buildings and lead them to safety. Every person you save adds more to the trail of people behind you, and it can be tough to get your Congo line to the escape zone, as all levels have a time limit and rescue quota. If they are not met, it's game over. Timing, patience, and a few tricks are required to truly master the game. Picking up only a few civilians at a time is not an option, as most of the levels require a long line of hundreds or even thousands to complete. Keeping that long line together is going to be difficult, especially on the later levels, but to help keep things under control, you are given a whistle that assembles them close together, as well as being a means to warn off predators. There's also a handy dash that enables you and your entire line to run past danger, but it does drain stamina. No old school inspired game would be anything without items and power-ups, and some of the items include stamina recovery, monster freeze, and the ability to warp back near to the safe zone. Using these items effectively is crucial for getting out of most of the cities before the timer runs out, and with up to 15 in total, there's plenty included to keep players busy. If you never got round to playing this one back in the day, now is the perfect time to jump in and try it for yourself. If there was one word that could describe Killer is Dead, it would have to be weird, but with it coming from the rather eccentric Suda51, you wouldn't expect any different. It has a striking visual aesthetic that gives the game a sense of style in not just its presentation, but also in the combat. However, underneath the stylish veneer there's a convoluted story and certain gameplay mechanics that are bound to raise an eyebrow or two. It sees you taking on the role of Mondo as you set out to fulfill several assassination contracts. If I'm being honest, Killer is Dead story is a nonsensical mess that fails to offer any sort of real explanation for a majority of the events that happen during the game, but thankfully the gameplay more than makes up for it. It's very reminiscent of No More Heroes. Mondo's primary weapon is a katana, and you can perform special finishes on the enemies, just like Travis in No More Heroes. What makes Killer is Dead's combat different though is Mondo's cybernetic arm, which can morph into 4 different weapons that are unlocked through completing side missions. The 4 weapons require blood in order to be used, which can all be picked up from fallen enemies, but that same blood Mondo collects can also be used to heal himself. As such, some strategy is involved in deciding whether to use your weapons or heal Mondo if your health is running low. But an important part of Killer is Dead's combat is dodging, because it allows Mondo to continue building up a combo. Once the combo meter is high enough, you can perform a finisher that grants you a different bonus depending on which one of the face buttons you pressed. Overall, the confusing story, short length and weird side missions of Killer is Dead bog down what is an otherwise enjoyable game. The combat is fun and the visuals are gorgeous, but the story will leave you confused and constantly wondering what the hell is going on. If you can look past that aspect of the game, Killer is Dead is well worth giving a go. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 3 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date, and also join our growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Quinn, Dio, Alex and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos, monthly Q&As and giveaways for as little as $1 per month, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.